So I've been hesitating to make this video for a few days since I finished the book, because it's not going to be like the, overwhelming sense of amazement and gushing that my previous reviews were, and that I sort of was hoping this review would be. Yeah, I'm not sure how, I'm not sure I'm going to articulate what I want to say very well. So you are warned. So I just finished The Hero of Ages by Brandon Sanderson. This is the third book in the Mistborn trilogy. Because it's the last book in a series, there are going to be spoilers immediately in the premise for this book, for the previous two novels. So if you haven't read those yet, please do not watch this review video. I won't have any spoilers for this particular book. I will just talk about my thoughts. So if you haven't read this one, you're safe, but if you haven't read the previous two, please don't watch it. I don't want this to be the thing that spoils those books for you. So we left off in the last book with Vin releasing some sort of power into the world and Alan becoming a Mistborn. Where the previous book was about Alan sort of securing his position of leadership and power, this book is about him and Vin trying to fight this newly released power that is practically omniscient. There seems to be a conflicting sense of scale in this book. On the one hand, we have the end of the world, Armageddon type stuff, and then on the other hand, we have these two cities. And these two cities, one called Fadrex and one or two, I have no idea if I'm saying those correctly, but these are sort of moderately sized cities. They're both a lot smaller than Luthadel. I actually think this worked really well. I get what Sanderson was trying to do with these two cities. He draws parallels between these two cities and Luthadel, both pre and post the Lord Ruler's death. And he draws a comparison between these two cities as well. And this sort of, he sort of tries to explore themes that were set up at the very beginning of the series about, revolution and leadership and power and sort of Scar rule versus nobility rule. And I think it worked quite well. Yeah, I could see what he was doing. But it was when he got to the sort of grander scale stuff that it fell a bit flat for me. I actually feel like there was more tension in the previous novel, with Alan and Luthadel and who was going to govern, and it all felt like the stakes were really high because there were these armies, and it felt, it was very tense, and I really enjoyed that tension. It was exciting. Whereas in this book, I didn't feel that tension, that sort of impending doom as much as the previous novel, even though this book had a sort of grander scale. I just found the grander scale stuff a bit vague, almost too vague to feel threatening, at least not until the very end of the novel. Once we hit the last 150, 200 pages, suddenly the stakes felt really high. It was coming up to the end of the series. I started to fear for everyone's life because I was someone's gonna die. But despite the ending having some of the best imagery of the entire series, I still found the conclusions and the explanations given sort of a bit too wishy-washy for me and my personal taste. I would have preferred something a bit more corporeal and solid. So I ended up giving it 3 stars. It wasn't perfect, but I did enjoy moments. Most of the novel dragged for me. I do think overall it was sort of the weakest of the trilogy. That doesn't mean it's a bad book, I just think the other two were stronger, particularly Mistborn. I kind of actually really want to reread Mistborn to see how I think about it now that I know how the series ends. Also, I want to mention my shirt. I wore this especially for this video because my previous 2 Mistborn reviews, I wore this t-shirt, this denim shirt, so I thought it's sort of the closest thing to a tradition that I have on this channel. This is definitely my Mistborn reviewing shirt, which is a very specific piece of clothing, but I felt like wearing it. So that's my review. I actually would like to continue talking about what specifically irritated me about this novel, and why I gave it 3 stars, but it all includes spoilers. So I'm going to continue talking, but it will contain spoilers literally for the very end of this novel. So don't watch this don't continue watching if you haven't read this. warning. Pretty much like my main issue with this book is that it was just like way too religious for me, and the last few chapters felt like the beginning of a Bible rather than the end of a fantasy novel. And I mean, I have no problems with religion being in books, even being like the main focus of a book. It was just too much for me. As the book went on, it sort of got loftier and loftier, and it detracted away from the original storyline of what I really liked was, how do you transition from this sort of corrupt government to a fair and stable one. By the end of the novel, Sanderson almost like completely erases his themes of like leadership and revolution and all of this to make way for this sort of God storyline that I just felt too easy for me. Like, I'm a fan of like revolutions and rebellions and things throughout history, and that was sort of like my favorite bit of the book. And even though, like, looking back, like with hindsight, I can tell that this ending is the ending that he has been working towards, it didn't feel like that at the beginning of the book. Like, I couldn't tell. So by the end of it, he just sort of bulldozes my favorite aspect of the book, which is this sort of very true and real depiction of a revolution, like this uneasy upheaval, and he replaces that complexity with like just make one of your friends a god. It's that simple. Like, I wanted a conclusion to this rebellion storyline, and I don't feel like that happened. I feel like it just sort of got pushed aside to make Says the god. Like, he literally said, like, he ends the novel with saying, I'm sure Spook is gonna be a great leader. Like, what? I want to see that, man. I want to see Spook rebuild the world and try and change things for the better. I want to, like, I don't know, maybe I just got too invested in sort of the politics of the book, but I can't deny that I'm disappointed. I know I should appreciate this book for what it is, like what it's trying to be, rather than what I want it to be, and like I feel a bit bad about giving it 3 stars, but it's just these types of plot lines aren't to my taste. Like, I don't really find higher power type stories interesting. So despite how it may seem, I actually don't regret reading this book, or this series, really. I really enjoyed it. It feels kind of odd saying that after this review.